Hey guys, tonight we slip off our sandals and wander back through time, not just any time, but to the bustling mornings of ancient Rome, when roosters, not smartphones, woke you up. The streets are dusty, the air smells like sun-baked stone and damp linen, and there's a good chance your breakfast is whatever didn't spoil overnight. Welcome to a world where every bite depends on the weather, the season, and what hasn't turned green with mold. You're about to discover what it's like to eat when there's no fridge, no plastic wrap, and definitely no Uber Eats. You probably won't survive this, but hey, people back then somehow did. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up on a straw mattress that crunches when you roll over. It's early, too early. Probably, but the baker's boy is already shouting down the alley. You step out into the cool air, stomach growling, and you know what's waiting, Panis. The course. Hearty bread. That's practically the Roman version of a granola bar. Sometimes, it's made with a dash of honey, if you're lucky. Usually, just barley, wheat, or even spelt, whatever the fields yielded last harvest. Bread isn't just food, it's a schedule. Bakers start around midnight, using communal ovens that heat up like dragon mouths. And if you don't get there fast, your loaf might be burnt or worse, gone. You clutch a warm round of panis in your hand, the crust flaking slightly, the inside still soft from baking in terracotta molds, stamped with the baker's mark. Historians still argue whether the average Roman ate 3 meals a day, or just 1 or 2. But one thing's clear, this bread is non-negotiable, and it's not fancy. Rich folks get fancy honey-dipped, seed-sprinkled stuff with exotic spices. You get sustenance. You chew. You survive. And maybe you dunk it in watered-down wine. Yes, wine for breakfast. Because the water kinda sketchy. You pass a neighbor gnawing on yesterday's crust, softened in a little oil, and wave. You notice her clay oil jar, tucked by the door, probably topped with a waxed cloth to keep flies out. Olive oil goes rancid fast in summer, so they use it fast. Eat it. Rub it on wounds. Even on skin for glow. Who needs Sephora when you've got extra virgin? A fringe theory says soldiers sometimes dipped bread in vinegar and called it posca, a poor man's electrolyte drink. You try it once and pucker like a startled goat. You finish breakfast just as the sun starts roasting the cobblestones. And you know it's time to see what else the day might feed you. You shuffle through the forum's early light, rubbing sleep from your eyes with one hand, a coin tucked in the other. Around you, market stalls bloom like mushrooms canvas. Rope, shouting, the air smells like crushed herbs, goat, sweat, and the tang of ripe figs split open underfoot. No refrigeration means urgency. You don't shop for the week. You shop for now. You pause at a basket of olives, fat, green, glistening with brine. The vendor spears one for you to taste, and it hits your tongue salty, earthy, a little funky. You nod, hand over a worn coin, and move on. Next stall, cheese. Fresh, barely pressed curd that's still warm in its linen wrap. It will sour by noon. You nibble it on the spot. The woman selling it tells you her goats ate thyme this week. Better flavor. She grins, missing a tooth, and you wonder if that's from age or bad cheese. Historians still argue whether most Romans used these markets daily, or if many had small gardens for greens and herbs. You see both here. A boy selling garden cress from his mother's yard. A man hawking imported garum, fermented fish sauce that smells like an open grave, but tastes like heaven on stew. You spot some fruit grapes clumped like bees, apples with scabs, and all. Romans liked their food real, ugly sometimes, but potent. You reach for a fig, and it splits in your fingers, oozing syrup like a little jam grenade. Sweet, messy, perfect. Suddenly, a ruckus. A woman argues with a vendor over spoiled melons. There's shouting, a slap, and a melon explodes on the ground like an overripe moon. You walk on. Behind you, flies gather. By midday, you're sweating like a boiled clam. The sun's relentless, bouncing off the stone roads and your own back. You wipe your brow and glance at a stall shaded with dampened cloth. It's selling cured meat's fat, salt-rubbed pork slabs, and what looks like, yes, definitely some kind of sausage that's turned just enough to make you nervous. No fridge means preservation, is a daily obsession. Salt is gold. Smoke is science. Vinegar is the panic button. You've helped once rubbing raw cuts of goat meat with so much salt, your fingers cracked. You remember the sting. You remember the flies. Up in the hills, where the breeze is better and the smoke can rise without suffocating your neighbors. Families hang meat over smoldering oak. It absorbs everything: the smoke, the heat, the prayers whispered, just in case it doesn't rot before winter. A quirky method you once saw fish buried in sand by the sea. Salted, then forgotten for weeks. Somehow, it worked. Or it didn't. You never heard from that guy again. Historians still argue whether Roman kitchens had proper smoke rooms, or just adapted their fireplaces for the job. Either way, fire was your fridge. And if you were rich, maybe ice blocks hauled from mountains. Maybe you nibble a strip of salted meat and chew like it owes you money. It's tough, salty. You might be dehydrated now. You drink wine. Again, you hear a woman muttering about burying jars in cool soil. She's preserving beans in oil. Trick is to keep the air out. Oxygen is the enemy. You nod, like you understand the chemistry. Even though your last jar of beans grew fuzz, you spit out a piece of bone. It tastes like survival. The sun dips. Finally, shadows stretch long, and the heat slinks off like a thief. You duck into a cellar stone-lined. Musty, blessedly cool. This is where the real treasure lives. Root vegetables piled like gold, stored by color and hardness and hope. Your sandals crunch over dry leaves as you inspect rows of cabbages, turnips, parsnips. Some are starting to sprout. Others are perfectly firm. You pick one up, turn it over in your hand. It smells like dirt and pepper and January. In winter, this is life. Roots that can last months if kept cool. Dry and alone. You learn tricks. Keep carrots upright in sand. Wrap radishes in cloth. Bury garlic in ash. Historians still argue whether Roman storage pits were insulated with straw or just naturally chilled by the earth. You've seen both, sometimes with reed mats, sometimes with crushed amphorae shards to wick moisture away. A fringe belief says singing to your cellar produce makes it last longer. You tried once. The onions didn't respond, But hey, it felt cozy. You set aside a few good roots. You'll make soup tomorrow, lentils and leek. Maybe a scrap of dried pork if you have any left. Above you, the streets are still noisy, but here cool, quiet. The smell of future meals wrapped in silence. You step outside the cellar, the dusk cooling the air just enough to make the hunt for lunch bearable. Unlike today, where a quick scroll or a tap gets dinner delivered, your meal depends entirely on your own hustle. No fridge means no easy stash what you catch or gather. You eat soon or risk disaster. You set out to fish at the Tiber's muddy edge, hoping to snag something fresh before the sun sets. You sit quietly, lines cast with crude hooks fashioned from bent bronze wire. Nearby, a fisherman wrestles a slippery eel, the slimy creature writhing like a rebellious snake. If you're lucky, you'll get that much. If you're luckier, maybe a few small fish or crustaceans. Your stomach growls louder than the river's gentle lapping. But patience is the game. Romans prized fish highly. Fresh was best. Salted next best. And dried or smoked last resort. Historians still argue whether fish farming pisciculture was widespread or confined to wealthy estates. You've heard rumors of pond-raised mullet, but mostly, fish come from the wild, seasonal and unpredictable. The fringe tales are always better. One story claims that some fishermen used crushed herbs to lull fish into nets, a sort of ancient fish anesthesia. Probably nonsense. But it makes you wonder what secrets the river holds. If you can't catch fish, you might try your hand at trapping small game or bartering with vendors back at the forum. But it's a gamble. What's ripe one day is gone the next. And remember, without refrigeration, even a day-old catch risks becoming a biohazard. You finally pull a small, shimmering fish from the line. Victory. You feel the weight of your effort and know this is the meal you'll bring home. With the sun dipping lower, you head to a neighbor's rooftop where figs dry in the warm air, their skins shrinking and sugars concentrating into sticky jewels. The rooftop smells like a sweet bakery and a fruit market combined. You help turn the figs carefully, making sure they dry evenly, knowing that once dried, they'll last through the lean months ahead. Honey jars sit nearby, sealed tight with beeswax and packed with floral aromas. Honey is liquid gold used not only to sweeten desserts, but also for medicinal purposes and preserving fruits. You watch as the neighbor ladles thick honey into small clay pots, sealing each with a careful wax lid. The scent is intoxicating, and you sneak a tiny taste. Sticky, floral, and warm on your tongue. Honey drying and fig preservation are ancient arts. Historians still argue whether Romans relied more on drying or fermenting for fruit preservation. Both had their charms and their risks. Sometimes dried figs ferment in the wrong conditions, turning your sweet treat into a surprise party for your gut flora. A quirky fact: you remember Romans sometimes buried honey jars underground during hot summers to keep them cool, which worked better than you'd expect. The earth has a fridge effect. You watch children chase bees, laughing despite the stings. The neighborhood's hive hums quietly in the background, a reminder that even without a fridge, nature does its own version of food storage and preservation. You pocket a dried fig as a snack, and think about how even the simplest foods have stories that stretch back centuries. You find yourself peeking into the kitchens of the rich, where the air is thick with the scent of extravagant foods. You could only dream of stuffed dormice glazed with honey, flamingo tongues delicately arranged on silver platters, and exotic spices imported from the far corners of the empire. This is the world of the patricians, where feasting is as much about status as it is about sustenance. Meanwhile, your barley porridge back home waits patiently plain. Hearty, unpredictable, the disparity is stark. Historians still argue how much these lavish banquets influenced common diets, or if they were simply theatrical displays of excess. Quirky accounts describe banquets where guests vomited mid-feast to make room for more courses, turning gluttony into a sport. While that might be fringe or exaggerated, it highlights how little the rich worried about food scarcity compared to you. You remember a story about a senator who kept a special kitchen staff just to tend his flamingo tongues. A luxury so niche it's almost comical now. The catch: the flamingos were shot during migration, so timing was everything. That's seasonal eating. Roman style. Your barley porridge, though humble, is reliable. It's made from coarse grains, cooked with water or milk, sometimes thickened with herbs or a pinch of salt. It might not win any awards, but it keeps you alive and aware. As you leave the patrician house, the sweet and spicy aromas linger, making you more appreciative of your simple, seasonal fare. After all, no fridge required. You wander deeper into the heart of Rome, where the Forum bustles with voices and footsteps, the hub of trade and politics. Amid all the chaos, you notice something remarkable: massive blocks of stone and deep-shadowed alcoves, where perishables seem to linger longer than logic allows. This isn't magic. It's the closest thing to a fridge in ancient Rome. Stone structures here serve as natural refrigerators. Thick marble slabs and cool caves under buildings provide chilly spots for storing fresh food. Vendors and wealthy cooks use clever timing, delivering produce in the early morning or late afternoon when temperatures dip to keep their goods fresh. The Forum's open-air stone fountains help cool the air nearby, creating microclimates that slow spoilage. Historians still argue whether these stone cold spots were intentionally designed as cold storage or just convenient byproducts of Roman architecture. Either way, Romans knew how to use their environment smartly, sometimes relying on shadow and stone more than salt or smoke. One quirky tidbit: some markets placed fish in crushed snow packed inside straw baskets to extend freshness. Imagine buying salmon that smells like winter in midsummer. Of course, snow was rare and expensive in the city, making this a luxury. You watch as a vendor packs fresh figs carefully into a stone basin, hoping to keep them from wilting under the heat. It's a race against time and microbes. Remember that frantic melon fight at the market stone coolers? Might have saved those melons from exploding. As you turn away, you think about how the Forum functions like one big, ancient refrigerator operating entirely on ingenuity, weather, and a dash of luck. Back in a shaded corner, you dip a crisp cucumber into a briny jar of pickles, sour, salty, and just the right bit of crunchy. Welcome to the Roman obsession with fermentation and brining, where vinegar and salt transform ordinary veggies into magical, long-lasting snacks. Garum, the fermented fish sauce, that's basically Roman ketchup, reigns supreme here. Without refrigeration, fermentation is your best friend and sometimes your worst enemy. Pickling wasn't just practical, it was cultural. Jars of olives, cabbage, carrots, and even dormice found their way into brine. The process was slow and smelly, but extended shelf life significantly. Historians still argue whether garum was more of a condiment or a medicinal elixir, given its strong flavor and rumored health benefits. Some fringe scholars suggest Romans even fermented cheese with herbs to create bizarrely pungent delicacies that modern noses might reject. You remember tasting a fermented fig once. It tasted like grape soda gone terribly wrong but strangely addictive. That's the magic and risk of brine. The jars sit heavy, sealed with wax and clay, often buried in the earth or kept in cool cellars to control the fermentation. If the seal broke, instant disaster, or at least a house full of flies. You crack open a new jar, and the sharp tang hits your nose like a slap. You smile. This is preservation and flavor, all rolled into one sticky bite. It's the season you dread and secretly respect the autumn slaughter. You wake before dawn to the sounds of animals being butchered, an annual ritual that feeds families through the cold months ahead. No fridge means no chance to let meat linger. The entire neighborhood is involved. You help gut a freshly killed pig, trying not to gag as the blood seeps into the dirt. The meat is salted, smoked, and packed into clay jars. Everyone shares, barters, and stores what they can. The smell of curing meat mingles with the autumn air, intense and unforgettable. Historians still argue whether Romans slaughtered only in autumn or did smaller kills year-round depending on climate and need. You've heard tales of small family flocks butchered whenever hunger struck. But autumn was the big event. A quirky, if somewhat grisly, fringe practice involves stuffing intestines with seasoned meat to make sausages, sometimes with unexpected ingredients like pine nuts or dormice. You once tried a sample. Let's just say you developed a new appreciation for bread. You realize preserving meat was as much art as survival. Too little salt and the meat spoiled. Too much, and it was nearly inedible. Smoke was the magic ingredient, sealing in flavor and longevity. You wipe your hands on your tunic, the taste of iron lingering on your tongue. This ritual is brutal, but it means you won't starve in the winter. The morning greets you with the sharp aroma of herbs and freshly crushed garlic as you enter the small kitchen garden behind your house. Here, no fridges are needed for these little powerhouses of flavor and preservation. Rosemary, thyme, and bay leaves sprout in neat rows, their scents mingling with the warm earth beneath your feet. These herbs are the unsung heroes of Roman cooking and food storage, used to flavor, preserve, and even mask the less than fresh bits. You pinch a sprig of rosemary and rub it between your fingers. Its piney scent bursts into the air. Herbs like this were often added to meat cures or tossed into jars of olives and pickles. They weren't just about taste. They helped fight bacteria and delay spoilage. Bay leaves, in particular, were thought to have magical properties, warding off decay and even evil spirits. Hey, if you're gonna risk eating fish sauce, you might as well bring some protection. Historians still argue how much the average Roman garden influenced daily cooking versus the market's seasonal supplies. Some say urban Romans relied heavily on small gardens for freshness. Others believe most fresh produce came from regional farms delivered quickly. Quick still. Some scholars speculate that Romans might have used aromatic herbs as natural air fresheners to combat the smells of their kitchens. Imagine, centuries before Febreze, rosemary was the MVP. You carefully harvest a bundle of thyme to take inside, already imagining it sprinkled on your next stew, hoping it will keep your meal tasting fresh just a little longer. Midday heat pushes you toward the bustling street vendors, where the scent of hot flatbreads fills the air. You pick up a thin, round focaccia-like bread cooked on a hot stone, its surface glistening with olive oil and sprinkled with salt and fresh herbs. No refrigeration means bread needs to be consumed quickly or transformed to last. This flatbread is a perfect solution. Flatbreads like these were versatile, sometimes eaten fresh, sometimes dried into hardtack for travel or soldiers. You watch as a vendor sprinkles crushed olives and herbs onto the dough before it crisps in the oven. The smell is intoxicating, a warm mix of earth and salt and summer sun. Historians still argue whether Romans baked bread primarily at home or relied on commercial bakers for their daily supply. You've heard stories of communal ovens where people brought their dough, creating social hubs where news and gossip were baked in alongside the bread. Here's a quirky fact. Some flatbreads were intentionally overcooked to make them hard as rocks, perfect for dipping in wine or sauces. Lasting days, without molding. You imagine biting into one of those on a long march and feeling like a crunchy warrior as you nibble the warm bread. You think about how even the simplest foods adapted perfectly to the seasons, soft and fresh when the market overflowed, hard and durable when times got tough. The afternoon fades and you find yourself in the shade of a fig tree, plucking ripe, sun-warmed figs one by one. Figs are the sweet jewel of Roman fruit, loved fresh, but often dried to extend their life well beyond harvest. The process is simple, but delicate, spread thin on mats, turned regularly, and sheltered from moisture and pests. Without refrigeration, drying was a lifeline for fruit lovers. You see figs hanging in bunches like tiny lanterns, their skins shrinking, and sugars concentrating into sticky treasures. Dried figs, sweetened porridge, decorated cakes, or were eaten alone as a snack that could last months. Historians still argue whether Romans dried fruit primarily for preservation or ritual purposes, given figs' symbolic importance in Roman religion and culture. Some suggest that dried figs were used in offerings or festivals more than everyday eating. A quirky belief suggests that figs dried during certain moon phases had better flavor and longer shelf life, though you suspect this was more superstition than science. It's fun to imagine the farmers chanting moon songs as they worked. You pop a dried fig into your mouth, sticky and chewy, a concentrated burst of summer sunshine, preserved for leaner days ahead. It's a reminder that even in a world without fridges, nature's sweetness could still be savored year-round. Evening descends, and you walk toward the bustling market near the city gates, where farmers from the countryside gather with the season's last fresh vegetables. You spy plump artichokes and bitter greens piled high, their colors vibrant against the fading light. These vegetables come straight from fields, tended by hands that know the rhythms of the earth. No cold trucks or sterile warehouses here. Just dirt, sweat, and the sun. Romans ate what was in season, and vegetables were usually a side dish, but their role grew in importance when meat was scarce or expensive. You carefully select a bunch of wild chicory and some spring onions, knowing that cooking them fresh means you get all the nutrients and flavors that would vanish if refrigerated too long. Historians still argue whether the average Roman urbanite consumed fresh vegetables daily or mostly dried and preserved versions. Especially in winter, you've heard that some city dwellers prized fresh veggies like a luxury, only enjoying them during market days. Here's a quirky detail. Roman cooks sometimes used ashes from burnt vegetable scraps to create a rudimentary fertilizer, recycling nutrients centuries before the word sustainability was even invented. As you barter for your greens, you feel connected to that ancient cycle, the land giving, the city taking, and all of it balanced on seasons and patience. Night falls, and you join neighbors around a small fire where pulses lentils, chickpeas, and broad beans simmer in a clay pot. Pulses are the humble protein of the common folk, versatile, filling, and long-lasting, even without refrigeration. They are the pantry staples that, once dried, can survive months and form the backbone of many meals. The slow simmer releases earthy aromas, mingling with the crackle of the fire and the faint scent of herbs thrown in for flavor. Eating pulses is a seasonal ritual in itself. After harvest, the dried beans would be stored for lean times, rehydrated when fresh produce was scarce. Historians still argue about the exact origins of Roman pulse cultivation, with some suggesting Eastern Mediterranean influences brought in new varieties and cooking methods. You wonder how much of what you eat is truly Roman, and how much is a blend of cultures across the empire. A quirky fact is that some Roman recipes called for mixing pulses with fish sauce, a combination that might raise eyebrows today, but was beloved back then for its umami kick. You scoop a spoonful, the warm beans melting in your mouth, a reminder that good food doesn't need fancy gadgets, just time and tradition. Late into the night, you settle down with a small bowl of mulsum, a simple mixture of wine and honey that Romans enjoyed as a sweet finish to their meals. Mulsum is more than a dessert. It's a seasonal treat, made from fresh wine, pressed in the late summer, and mixed with the honey harvested months earlier. Without refrigeration, this drink must be consumed quickly or carefully sealed. You swirl the amber liquid, the scent of wildflowers and fermented grapes tickling your nose. It's a comforting blend, warming your throat and wrapping you in the twilight. This sweetness was prized across social classes, though the quality and proportions varied widely from wealthy estates to humble homes like yours. Historians still argue how much honey was actually used in everyday cooking, with some thinking it was mostly reserved for medicinal or ritual uses rather than culinary sweetness. Maybe that explains why mulsum feels so indulgent. A quirky tidbit: some Romans believed mulsum had aphrodisiac properties, great for spicing up an evening without refrigeration. If you believe that, well, who are we to judge? You take a slow sip, feeling the slow dissolve of sugars and tannins. The night settling around you, it's a small luxury, a reminder that food and drink connect you to cycles of time, nature, and human ingenuity. You wake with the faint chill of early morning, stepping outside to check on the communal granary, a vital storehouse for the city's staple grain. Without refrigeration, dry grain was the cornerstone of food security. Barley, wheat, and spelt stacked high in clay jars or wooden bins, kept safe from moisture and pests by layers of ash and careful ventilation. Grain was king, and its harvest dictated the rhythm of Roman life. Bread, porridge, and pulse were all made from these humble seeds. The granary's cool, dusty air smells faintly of earth and history, reminding you that, centuries before, Rome's armies marched and won partly because they could feed themselves. Historians still argue about how centralized grain storage really was, whether most grain was controlled by the state or local communities handled their own supplies. The debate continues, but everyone agrees that without proper grain storage, an empire couldn't stand. A quirky story floats through your mind. Some Romans believed that placing a statue of a goddess near grain stores could ward off pests and spoilage, blending superstition and necessity in a way that feels oddly comforting. You run your fingers over the rough sacks, knowing that careful preservation here means fewer hunger pangs later. Proof that patience and preparation are timeless skills. Mid-morning sun warms the city as you make your way to the bustling wine press outside the city walls. Wine is life here without refrigeration. It's the mainstay of daily hydration and celebration. The press pumps slowly, crushing ripe grapes into fragrant juice, ready for fermentation. Fermentation is a precarious business. Without modern temperature controls, Vintners rely on cool caves or cellars to slowly turn grape juice into the empire's beloved drink. The process is a waiting game, a delicate balance of heat, time, and natural yeasts that can't be rushed. Historians still argue whether Roman wine was usually diluted with water or drunk straight, as practices varied wildly across regions and social classes. You imagine the debates over tavern tables, as rowdy as any political forum. Here's a quirky bit. Some vintners added resin or herbs to wine for flavor and preservation, kind of like ancient flavored seltzer. If you think about it, Molson was probably the original cocktail. You watch the golden juice flow, the smell of crushed grapes mixing with the warm earth beneath your feet. A reminder that without technology, nature sets the clock. As afternoon shadows stretch long, you visit a nearby apothecary to collect natural preservatives, vinegar, salt, and crushed herbs. These ingredients are the unsung heroes of food preservation without a fridge. Vinegar, especially, was prized not just for flavor, but for its antimicrobial properties, helping keep food safe and extending their shelf life. Salt is the cornerstone essential for curing meats, reining vegetables, and even drawing moisture from cheeses. Without refrigeration, salt was more precious than gold in some parts of the empire. You remember the salt roads, ancient trade routes dedicated to this mineral that preserved not just food, but economy. Historians still argue about how widespread home salting was, whether most families preserved their own food or relied on specialized artisans. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Quirky but true. Some Romans believed that salt could ward off evil spirits or bad luck, adding a mystical layer to a practical necessity. Maybe that's why the phrase, "worth one's salt," still echoes today. You pay the apothecary with a handful of coins. Knowing these simple elements hold the power to turn perishable food into lasting nourishment, a delicate balance of nature, science, and a pinch of superstition. You stroll toward the river market, where fishermen unload their morning catch small fish, eels, and the occasional crustacean still glistening with life. Without refrigeration, fish is the ultimate race against time. So Romans developed ingenious ways to preserve their aquatic bounty. Some fish get salted and dried. Others are fermented into the ever-present garum sauce, a pungent staple that flavors nearly everything. You watch a fisherman spread thin strips of fish on wooden racks, letting the sun and breeze slowly work their magic. It's a primitive but effective dehydration process, shrinking the flesh into chewy, salty strips that last for months. Historians still argue whether garum's popularity was primarily culinary or medicinal. Some sources suggest it was even used as an antiseptic or topical remedy, which might explain its overpowering scent. Quirkier, yet some garum factories were said to be so smelly they were banned from city centers, forcing production to the outskirts, a kind of ancient zoning law based on nose tolerance. You carefully pick up a small jar of fresh garum, the smell hitting your nostrils like a punch, but somehow promising depth and flavor in every drop. The late afternoon sun warms the public baths, where locals gather not just to clean but to socialize and discuss everything from politics to recipes. You overhear a heated debate over how best to store food without spoiling. Everyone has a different trick, from burying jars in cool earth to wrapping cheeses in fig leaves. You sit near the steaming pools, feeling the heat seep into your bones, and reflect on how Romans relied on communal wisdom passed down through generations. Without refrigeration, cooking and preservation were as much community efforts as individual chores. Historians still argue about how widespread food sharing was, whether markets were the primary source, or if people exchanged homemade preserves with neighbors to cope with seasonal scarcity. A quirky note: some Romans believed that certain foods, if stored improperly, could harbor evil spirits or curses, so food storage came with a fair share of rituals and prayers. As you soak your tired feet, you realize how deeply food preservation was woven into social and spiritual life, binding people together across seasons and struggles. Evening settles as you return to your modest kitchen, where a ceramic pot simmers with lentils, garlic, and wild herbs gathered earlier. The stove is a simple stone structure with an open flame, but you carefully regulate the heat to slowly cook your meal without burning precious fuel. Without refrigeration, cooking is all about timing. Too slow, and food spoils. Too fast, and flavors are lost. You stir the pot gently, inhaling the earthy aroma and thinking about how Romans balanced seasonality and necessity in every bite. Historians still argue whether most Roman meals were eaten fresh daily or if leftovers were common, preserved through salting or quick cooking to avoid waste. You suspect the truth is a little messy and varies with class and location. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some cooks used wine to mask the taste of less fresh ingredients, kind of like an ancient culinary band-aid that actually worked surprisingly well. You ladle a bowl, the steam rising in lazy spirals, promising warmth and sustenance as night deepens outside your window. Night deepens, and you turn your attention to the small store of preserved fruits lining your pantry shelves. These jars gleam in the flickering candlelight: honeyed quince, candied orange peels, and thick, dark preserves made from plums and cherries. Without refrigeration, Romans relied on sugar and honey to transform seasonal fruit into luxuries that could be enjoyed long after harvest. The process was slow, and sticky fruit was cooked gently with honey, then sealed in airtight containers made of clay or glass. These preserves were prized not only for their sweetness, but for their long shelf life, a testament to Roman ingenuity in the battle against spoilage. Historians still argue how widespread fruit preservation truly was, whether only wealthy households indulged, or if common folk had access to these sugary delights. It's safe to say that the method was known broadly, but quality and quantity varied greatly. A quirky note: some preserves were rumored to have medicinal properties, believed to soothe coughs or boost vitality, blurring the line between food and pharmacy. You dip a spoon into a jar of thick quince jelly. The flavor, a perfect balance of tart and sweet. A little luxury in a world without cold storage. Later in the afternoon, the sun hangs low but warm as you make your way to the outskirts of the city, where the steady hum of activity surrounds the ancient olive oil press. This place, both sacred and practical, holds the golden lifeblood of Roman cuisine: olive oil. As you approach, the pungent, fruity aroma of freshly crushed olives fills the air, mingling with the dust and the occasional tang of brine from nearby fish stalls. The rhythmic grind of massive stone wheels, crushing ripe olives, sounds like the heartbeat of this seasonal ritual, an ancient dance where time and nature entwine. Olive oil isn't just a cooking ingredient here. It's liquid gold, a versatile elixir that preserves, flavors, nourishes, and even heals. Without the luxury of refrigeration, this precious oil serves as a natural preservative, sealing in freshness and keeping spoilage at bay. Romans understood its power deeply, often submerging vegetables in oil to make comfits, slow-cooked treasures sealed from oxygen to extend shelf life. Cheese, too, was frequently packed in olive oil, creating a rich, tangy rind while warding off harmful bacteria. You watch closely as workers ladle the thick, fragrant oil into earthenware amphorae, carefully sealing each vessel with pine resin or wax to keep the precious liquid from turning rancid. The process is laborious and demands attention to detail, because one mistake can ruin months of toil. Historians still argue how extensive olive oil's role in preservation truly was. Was it mainly a seasoning, or did it function primarily as a protective barrier in food storage? Some suggest it was equally both, depending on region and household wealth. Either way, its importance can't be overstated. Olive oil shaped not just the flavor of Roman meals, but the entire approach to seasonal eating. Here's a quirky detail to savor: some Romans believed olive oil could purify the body and even ward off evil spirits, making it a magical multitasker in kitchens, baths, and temples alike. Olive oil lamps illuminated homes, and its smell was linked to sacred rituals, a fragrant guardian of hearth and health. You dip a finger into a small pool of fresh oil, swirling it slowly. The taste is vibrant, peppery, hungrig, and alive, hinting at sun-drenched groves miles away. It's a liquid memory of summer, captured and preserved, ready to carry you through the colder months when fresh fruits and vegetables are scarce. As the afternoon fades, you realize olive oil's enduring role in this pre-refrigeration world more than just an ingredient. It's a symbol of preservation, patience, and the ancient bond between humans and the land. As the evening breeze cools your skin, you carry a bundle of dried herbs back to your kitchen, a fragrant collection of rosemary, sage, and oregano gathered in the sunlit hillsides earlier that day. These herbs, carefully strung and hung from wooden rafters, fill the room with an earthy, calming aroma that feels like a direct thread to nature itself. Drying herbs is one of the oldest preservation methods. Deceptively simple, yet incredibly effective. Without refrigeration, fresh herbs would spoil within days, but drying locks in their essence the oils, flavors, and even some medicinal properties, allowing them to flavor meals and soothe ailments through long winters. You gently crush a few leaves between your fingers, releasing a burst of piney, floral fragrance. It's a reminder that Romans didn't just eat their herbs, they revered them. Many herbs served multiple purposes, from seasoning hearty stews to healing wounds or warding off illness. The ancient kitchen and the pharmacy were often one and the same. Historians still argue the precise role herbs played in Roman life. Were they mostly culinary tools? Or did their medicinal and ritual uses overshadow their flavoring? The lines blur, as Roman cooking was deeply intertwined with health and spirituality. A quirky tidbit you recall: hanging bundles of herbs near doorways was believed to protect against evil spirits and bad luck, a natural security system that smelled far better than any lock or alarm. Imagine walking into a home and being greeted by the fresh scent of thyme and lavender, a fragrant shield woven from nature's bounty. You add a pinch of dried oregano to a simmering pot, the aroma blooming instantly, promising warmth and comfort. This small act connects you to centuries of tradition, a timeless link to those who preserved their seasons with Earth's own gifts. As twilight deepens outside your window, the herb scent lingers, a quiet assurance that though fresh leaves will fade, their spirit endures, preserved by patience, sunlight, and ancient wisdom. Morning light filters through your window as you prepare to visit the local dairy, a humble but vital place where fresh cheeses are made every day. Cheese was one of the most important protein sources in Roman diets, especially for those without constant access to fresh meat. Yet without refrigeration, cheese was a paradox: delicious, but perishable, requiring ingenuity to preserve it. At the dairy, the scent of warm milk and tangy curds fills the air. You watch a cheesemaker carefully ladle thickened curds into wooden molds, pressing them gently to release whey. Some cheeses are fresh and soft, meant to be eaten within days, while others undergo salting, drying, or packing in oil to extend their shelf life. The process varies by region and preference. Pecorino, made from sheep's milk, is famous for its salty, firm texture and long aging process, perfect for storage and travel. Other varieties are delicate and fresh, enjoyed only in the moment. This balance between immediate consumption and preservation reflects the broader seasonal rhythm of Roman life. Historians still argue about how common aged cheese really was among average Romans. Was it a luxury or a staple? The evidence suggests both wealthier estates produced and consumed a variety of cheeses, while smaller households focused on simpler, fresher versions. A quirky fact: some cheeses were flavored with herbs, honey, or even wine, turning preservation into an experimental art that blended taste and function. Imagine a honey-drizzled cheese, aged in a cool cellar, both a treat and a practical solution to spoiling. You sample a small piece of firm cheese, its salty tongue awakening your palate. It's a reminder that in a world without refrigeration, flavor was often inseparable from survival. Each bite speaks of patient craftsmanship and the wisdom of working with, not against, nature. As you leave the dairy, you carry a small parcel wrapped in cloth cheese to be eaten today, but also a symbol of how Romans preserved their food and culture in equal measure under the blazing midday sun. You make your way to the vibrant spice market, a kaleidoscope of colors and scents, where exotic flavors from across the empire mingle in tantalizing heaps. Spices were the jewel of Roman cuisine, prized not only for their ability to enliven food, but also for their preservative qualities, masking the taste of food that was starting to age and helping slow spoilage. You let your fingers wander through piles of peppercorns, coriander seeds, cumin, and dried mustard flowers. The textures vary, some coarse and grainy, others powdery and fine, each with its own story and origin. These spices traveled thousands of miles along treacherous trade routes, carried by merchants willing to brave deserts and seas, because their value was immeasurable. Even modest households prized a pinch of spice to brighten otherwise bland or preserved meals. A sprinkle of pepper or a dash of dried thyme could turn a simple stew into a festive dish, an important psychological lift in a diet constrained by seasonality and lack of refrigeration. Historians still argue how accessible these exotic spices truly were to the average Roman. Were they common pantry items or mainly reserved for wealthy elites and grand banquets? The truth probably lies in a gradient, depending on wealth, location, and trade connections. A quirky tidbit: many spices carried medicinal and magical reputations, believed to aid digestion, boost vitality, or even protect against curses. Romans didn't just cook with spices, they infused their food with layers of cultural meaning and superstition. You tuck a small pouch of dried thyme into your satchel, aware that this tiny packet carries the weight of an empire's trade, culture, and culinary innovation. Each sprinkle is a whisper from distant lands, a reminder that even in a world without refrigeration, flavor and preservation marched hand in hand. As the afternoon sun starts its slow descent, you find yourself at a bustling pottery workshop where artisans shape and fire amphorae large, sturdy jars, crucial for the storage of food and drink without refrigeration. The workshop is filled with the scent of clay and smoke, and the rhythmic tap of hammers and carving tools creates a soothing backdrop to the work. Watching a potter expertly seal the mouth of an amphora with pine resin, you realize how vital these containers are. The resin forms an airtight barrier that protects contents from air and moisture, preserving oil, wine, salted fish, dried fruits, and more. Without such vessels, the entire system of seasonal food preservation would unravel. You note the care with which these amphorae are handled and marked. Some bear stamps or inscriptions, indicating origin and quality, a rudimentary form of branding and quality control that reassures buyers about their seasonal stores. Historians still debate how much food was stored at home versus in communal warehouses or markets. Some argue that large granaries played a significant role in managing seasonal supplies, while others emphasize individual household storage. A quirky detail catches your attention. Some amphorae even had little holes to allow controlled air exchange for fermenting foods, an ancient precursor to modern food science experiments. You handle a freshly sealed jar, feeling its cool, rough surface, and imagining the journey it will make from sun-drenched fields, through market stalls, and finally into a humble kitchen. Each amphora carries a story of patience, skill, and the intimate dance with time and nature that defines life without refrigeration. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows. You know these jars will stand guard over the seasons, preserving the earth's bounty, one harvest at a time. As twilight deepens, you gather around a rustic wooden table with friends and family. The flicker of oil lamps, casting soft, dancing shadows. Plates are laden with simple, seasonal dishes, lentils simmered with herbs, fresh bread, still warm from the oven, olives preserved in brine, and cheese, wrapped in cloth, without refrigeration. Every meal is a triumph over the relentless march of time, a shared celebration of survival, culture, and connection. Food here is not just sustenance, it's a story, a tradition passed down through generations, a communal ritual shaped by nature's cycles and human resilience. You savor the hearty lentil stew, its warmth spreading slowly through your body. The spices and herbs linger on your tongue, a comforting reminder of the many hands who harvested, preserved, and prepared this meal with care. Conversation flows easily, stories blend with laughter, and the world outside feels distant and hushed. Historians still debate how much food culture influenced Roman social structures. Some argue communal meals reinforced civic identity and cohesion, while others see them primarily as practical gatherings for shared resources. A quirky reflection crosses your mind in a world without cold storage. Every bite was a tiny victory against decay, against hunger, against the indifferent passage of time. Meals were moments to savor, not just for taste, but for the very act of being together. You lean back, feeling full and content. The seasons will turn again, bringing new challenges and new harvests. But tonight, in this warm circle of light and laughter, you are home. Night deepens, and you lie back, the cool stone beneath you, grounding you in the rhythms of the natural world. Today's journey through Roman seasonal cooking without refrigeration leaves you with a quiet awe for human creativity, how people long ago shaped food, flavor, and survival around the earth's endless turning. You imagine countless hands planting, harvesting, salting, drying, and fermenting, each step guided by intuition. observation, and tradition. In their absence of cold storage, they mastered patience and ingenuity, crafting a food culture that honored the seasons and the limits of technology. Historians still debate whether Romans understood food safety in a modern sense, or if their practices were guided more by tradition and experience. Regardless, their resourcefulness laid the foundations for culinary customs that echo to this day. A quirky memory surfaces: some Romans even used crocodile dung as sunscreen. A bizarre, yet strangely practical remedy that reminds you their world was both inventive and peculiar. You close your eyes. The smells, taste, and textures of the day fading gently as your breath slows. The cycle of seasons, stories, and survival turns softly into dreams, inviting rest and renewal. As you drift towards sleep, imagine cool breezes rustling ancient olive groves and the quiet crackle of fires where food was lovingly prepared. Let the gentle rhythms of time and nature soothe your thoughts, reminding you that every meal is a connection to the earth and to those who came before. Now, rest easy. Tomorrow, the earth will turn again, bringing new life, new harvests, and new stories to savor. Good night, and sweet dreams.